Welcome to Attic Raiders Retro Reviews, where today we're going to be creating an alien creature for the game Alien Zoology, which is a war game where your small team of zoologists have to hunt down, weaken and capture an alien creature for your zoo. It's a figure agnostic game, but there's a real emphasis on creating your own alien creatures to hunt down. So today we're going to do just that. Now you can roll up genes and action cards from D50 tables to create your creature and then craft your creature to match those attributes, or you can craft first and assign genes and action cards later, which is what I prefer to do most of the time. For this build I'm going to be toy bashing, so I've got lots and lots of different animal toys, dinosaurs and things here that I've just got from car boot sales and charity shops, lots of cheap things, and I'm just looking for something that's a fun and interesting shape and which things might go together nicely. I really like the body shape on the sheep here with the digitigrade legs where you've got basically the kind of reverse knees. It's an interesting shape, so I think we're going to go for this and make it into something. I've decided I'm going to get rid of this sheep's face and replace it with some kind of trunk or tentacle coming out the front here, which is probably going to be made from some kind of tail. So I like to take different animals and see which tails work best by holding them in place and seeing which ones are kind of the right thickness or the right width and what's going to work the best and have the best kind of smoothest join when I put these two bits together. I like the sculpting on this lizard's tail, the kind of knobbly details, but also the curve that's already there in it, so I think I'm gonna go for this. I could use a Dremel or something electric, but I find with these kind of soft plastic toys that just a simple hobby knife goes through them really easily. Just need to take your time, be careful and wobble the blade back and forth and it goes straight through and you'll get things off really quite simply. Now I'm going to be using milliput later to blend the surfaces together where they've been joined, but I do find that when you're sticking them together it works better if you have a nice flat surface. I also like to get rid of the bits that are sticking out so that everything is nice and neat. I don't want these ears because they identify it too much as a sheep. I want to change this body up as much as possible to make it look more alien, so they're getting sliced off and then cleaned up. And while I'm at it, I'm going to get rid of that seam line from where it's been moulded and just kind of break it up to make it blend in better with the irregular wool shape on the back. And then where I've taken the ears off, I don't want those areas to be perfectly flat because that would look unnatural. So I'm going to use the knife to break those up and again add some dents and chips and try to sculpt it in to look like the rest of the wool or fur on the body, but just using the knife tip. Again, just using the knife blade to slice through that lizard tail. And I find that the different pieces don't go together exactly first time, so I'm going to have to change the angle of the cut in places and sometimes kind of scrape down where there is lumps or bumps to get them nice and flat so that they're going to get a smooth join. That'll make that join much stronger and it'll make it much easier and less filling later on. But it's always best to check these things as you go so that you don't cut off too much. Now I've already tried lots of different orientations for this trunk tentacle, hanging down, going up, but I've found that this for me is what looks the best, so a bit of super glue and pressing that into place. Again, I want to disguise that sheep shape, make it more alien, so I like to take other animals and compare parts of them in place next to them before actually cutting anything off. There, I'm going to use the tail from this white tiger, so cutting off the sheep's tail, and once it's nice and flat, slicing off the tail from that tiger. Some more whittling in order to get those surfaces to be nice and flat so that they join well, and then it's ready to super glue and then press into place. Again, dry fitting different orientations of the tail before actually gluing it into place, just so you can play around with the design. Again, I want to mix this up as much as possible, so I'm going to actually remove the hooves from this sheep body and replace them with some frog feet. Just going to take my model clippers and clip those feet off because it's easier than actually using the blade on these in this case. And then once they're all clipped off at the correct angle, it's important to do that, then we can get those frog feet glued on. Sometimes you really have to play about with the angle that you're going to attach different body parts at, so you really do have to slice and whittle a lot of little bits of plastic till you get it just right. Once the join angles look good, then a little bit of super glue and those feet can get glued on. And with all 4 feet attached, it's time I think for some eyes. For this I'm using some adhesive half pearls, and again play around with things, play about with the placement and the number of eyes until you get something that you're happy with. I've cut off the gummy kind of temporary adhesive and are using super glue instead here. And after trying different things out, I've just decided to go for one small eye here in the middle of its trunk. Again, adding bits from a different class of animal, going for an insect this time, and I'm just going to take some of the legs from this butterfly and snip them off. And I'm going to turn them into antennae. Again, bit of super glue on the head directly. I've cut this down slightly so it's a nice flat bit for the antennae to attach to, and that will just glue nicely in place. Again, flattening the other part where the other antennae is going to go so that I get a nice join. There's no lumps or bumps getting in the way that are going to cause gaps and weaken that join. And with the glue on the feet dry, I'm just going to whittle away any overhanging edges so that it all goes nicely and looks nice and smooth and natural. And then a bit more super glue to glue it down onto a base. You could use just thick card for your base or anything else that you want cut to shape, but I'm going to use a beveled round wargaming base for this guy. As I said before, this kind of plastic takes super glue really well, so it's really fast sticking it down and you'd only have to hold it in place for a little while. Now the toes look a bit awkward because they don't actually touch the base, but because it's such a soft plastic on these frog feet, you can easily add some glue and just bend them into place so that they're in contact with the base and they stick right where you want them to. And with that, I think I'm pretty happy with this little guy. Now all he needs is some filler to get those joins nice and smooth. When it comes to filling the gaps, I like to use milliput. Now this is just a 2-part epoxy putty where you take a little bit of each one and you mix them together, knead them, roll it around until they're a uniform colour, and you can use that to fill your gaps and it will be cured and rock hard in about 3 to 4 hours. I particularly like milliput because it's got a long working time before it starts being too hard that you're not going to be able to do much with it, and you can smooth it out using just a little bit of water really easily. It's much softer than green stuff, not as plasticky or as rubbery, takes more detail, and for me I just prefer working with this stuff. You're really not going to need very much. I like to roll out little sausages, wrap them around where it's needed, and then press them into place, getting that into those gaps. I don't want any lumpy blobby bits, so I'm just using a hobby knife blade which has been dipped in some water just to take off and scrape off some of that extra and help shape that into it so we've got a nice smooth transition. I then like to feather in the edges of those joints, blend everything together more, and you can use silicone tools for this, but I just use the end of a paintbrush dipped in some water and my finger. And then because I don't want a flat join, I want it to be textured the same as all the rest of the fur on this creature, I just flip the brush around and use the bristle side, which, as this is an old brush, it's quite hard, so it gives a nice texture. And then it's just making sure that every gap is smoothed, textured and cleaned up. Even if you've made sure that you cut those edges really carefully and straight and make sure that there's no gaps, it just really does tie everything together much better and makes it look so much more natural. While that milliput is curing, I'm going to do the base for this guy so that they can both dry together at the same time. I'm going to use some PVA glue here and just mix that with sand. It's about a 50-50 ratio, but you do have to play around with it a little bit. Too much glue and it becomes too watery and just everything settles and it's really flat when it's on a base. Too much sand and it's too clumpy and it's really hard to work with. I just use an old paintbrush and smear it onto the base and then move it around with the tip of the brush, getting it into all of those gaps, trying to cover everything and make sure you've got some lumps and bumps left in there. For tricky bits like the toes, then I'll just use a smaller paintbrush and paint that sand mixture into the gaps, then use a small wet paintbrush and just use that to clean the gluey sand mixture off of the toes, exposing them more, making it look natural as if it's standing on top of that. Once the whole base has been covered with sand and glue, then I'll leave that and the milliput overnight to dry, then we'll be ready for paint. I just use a really cheap grey primer. I don't bother with zenithal highlights because I don't use any contrast paints. Everything you see here is just acrylic paints, either from Citadel or from Revel. Once all the base colours are blocked in, then I use a mixture of wet blending, washes, glazes and dry brushing. And it's just a matter of watering down the acrylics with water and playing around with the colours until you're happy with them. With the hooves removed and the frog's feet put in place, this, once it's been primed, looks far more rodent than it did bovine. So I'm going to ignore the fact that this was originally wool and paint it to look like fur, some kind of jungle animal, maybe with spots or stripes, some kind of camouflage so that it can blend in with the foliage on the savannas where it lives. Given that its feet originally came from a tree frog, I'm going to say that this creature is really good at climbing and sticking to surfaces, with those big pads on the ends of its toes. Now I've realised that this creature doesn't actually have a mouth or any kind of holes in the end of its trunk, so there's no real way for it to feed conventionally. So maybe it absorbs dew or nourishment from the savanna grasses directly through the skin of its trunk. And that concept ties in nicely with one of the Alien Zoology action cards, Life Force Theft. I'm definitely going to assign that action card to this creature. One of the things that I really like about Alien Zoology is that not all of the creatures that you create have to be predators. So many of the miniatures that are used in war games all have big teeth, sharp claws and really angry expressions on their faces. Because obviously you're going to be fighting them, so they're going to be quite monstrous. But with this, you've got the scope and the freedom to create your own alien creatures, which can just exist in any kind of ecosystem, and they could be entirely peaceful or prey species if you want. Because you're setting out to capture this animal for a zoo, not to kill it because it's killing villagers. But prey species still have defences of their own, so they're still going to be dangerous to try and capture. This guy to me looks like some kind of big cat, maybe crossed with an aardvark. But I also like the bovine origins coming from the fact that it's got a sheep's body. So I think this for me is going to be a grazer. So again, I can use another action card, which is going to be about eating grass so that it can gain energy. I imagine this creature snuffling around the long grass of the savannah, absorbing nutrients from the grass in through its tentacle trunk, but also being able to use that mechanism to defend itself from predators. Maybe this thing doesn't just eat grass, maybe it's omnivorous, maybe it goes for little insects, very much like an anteater, sticking that long trunk or tentacle down into their nests and absorbing their life force directly. And perhaps those antennae on its head help it to detect the movement of its prey under the ground. It's only got one eye, so it needs some better senses, and maybe those antennae are helping it detect the world around it better. Going with its original sheep toy body origin, I'm giving it a wide, flat, rectangular pupil, just like a sheep or a goat, because this kind of eye shape lets the creature see all round itself, which is perfect for a grazing prey species. This critter certainly doesn't want to be attacked and eaten while its head's down absorbing those nutrients from the grass. Although this creature does like to amble around looking for food in the grass, it does have those really good grippy feet, so it does like to climb a lot. It probably nests in trees, and that way it would be safe when it's sleeping from ground-based predators. Given that it's in trees a lot, some of its prey, some of the insects that it eats probably live under the bark of some of the trees as well. So that tentacle trunk would be great for ripping off the bark from trees so that it could get to those insects. And given that it's got that really long tail, it's probably quite prehensile so that it can grip branches and stop it from falling out of treetops. Given that slit-like pupils are good for dramatic contracting and expanding in low light levels, this is probably going to be a nocturnal creature. And its beautiful spotted coat means that it's in danger of being hunted so that it can be made into fashionable items for people to wear. And there we have him finished, ready to be hunted down in a game of Alien Zoology or used in any wargame you want. Really hope you've enjoyed seeing my process here and that it encourages you to go out and have a go at toy bashing yourself. And I hope to see you again on the next Attic Raiders Retro Reviews.